how can we as a broadcaster bring emerging and successful leagues and sports to fans?
Gosh, whoever is in Kiri's team at work is very lucky to have her.
That was the biggest driver for me coming into DAZN and into that environment.
You are the Senior Commercial Partnerships Manager at DAZN. They have just bought out the Foxtel Group for, I think, 3.4 billion Australian dollars. So they're about to take over everything.
I work on the commercial partnerships across our women's sports portfolio. The earlier you get a broad understanding of the work industry that you want to go into, the better.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Grad Podcast, the ultimate guide to make it in the sports industry, brought to you by Deakin University, home to the world's #1 sports science school. My name is Ruben Williams. I'm an ex-Cricket Australia employee who started Sports Grad to help others get their dream job in sport, and now it's become my own dream job. I absolutely love helping people land their dream job in sport and seeing the success they go on to have in their career. Now, the purpose of this podcast is to help you get a job in sport. So if that's you, feel free to subscribe to the pod and I'll be in your ears every week with advice on how you can start living the dream in sport. Today's episode is super exciting for myself because coming up on the show today is Kiri Madhani, Senior Commercial Partnerships Manager at DAZN. And she's also part of the team that was recently shortlisted for Football Business of the Year Award at the 2025 Women's Football Awards. There is plenty to look out for in this conversation, including who is DAZN, what makes them a massive player in the sports media world, and also how Kiri very consciously pivoted her career from game development type roles in charities across university sport as well into the commercial world, working with $1 million deals and a lot of major rights holders. Plus, there's also a lot of tools and excellent advice on how to handle difficult conversations and work with others effectively. Personally, Kiri is also one of my oldest friends in the sports industry, so naturally we go off topic a little bit from time to time, but I really enjoyed chatting with Kiri and getting to pick her brain and having a conversation that, I might not normally get to have with her, but I hope you enjoy it as well. Before we jump in, if you haven't subscribed to the Sports Grad newsletter, make sure you jump onto that. sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter is where you can get it, and you will not miss a single episode or anything that goes on in Sports Grad land. Now, grab a pen. Here is Kiri Madhani. Have you got your eye on a future in sport? If you're ready to transform the industry, then perhaps get ready to study with Deakin and prepare yourself to redefine what it means to work in sport. That's what I did at least. Deakin's School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences is ranked #1 in the world. Pretty cool, hey? So if you want to turn your passion for sport into an impactful career, get ready to push the limits of exercise science, sport coaching, sport development, sport management, nutrition sciences, physical education, and more. You can do it all at Deakin. Apply now and study at Deakin University. Kiri, welcome to Sports Grad.
Hello, thanks for having me. I feel very privileged to be here.
These are my favorite kind of episodes where I get the unique opportunity to chat to longtime friends who I know very well, but get to lobby questions at in a format that might otherwise not be appropriate over coffee or drink. So I'm very excited to probably dig into the different corners of your career/life that I might not already know about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. And as I've said, I've listened to a good few episodes. It's always a podcast that keeps me entertained on my commute. So I'm glad that I can be a part of it, and hopefully I can be helpful to some of your listeners.
Well, I know we've never worked directly together. We've crossed over in a professional sense way back in the early days in 2016. But I can only imagine to get to where you are now in your role at DAZN that one of the best experiences that represents your diligency at work is how you bring together people to buy Glastonbury tickets, because I've seen the operation that you put together and the documentation you put together to make sure everyone is on task, and it is absolutely outstanding. And I can only imagine that is a representation of how you conduct yourself in the rest of your life. So can you confirm whether or not this was a part of your pitch to DAZN to say, hey, this is what I can offer your organisation?
I think my manager would absolutely love this, because the Glastonbury example is it mirrors exactly my role at the moment. All the work, all the organisation, the attention to detail, the communication, the teamwork doesn't always necessarily result in success, right? So I am in a tough job selling women's football broadcast sponsorship and media, and the landscape is turbulent, even though it's growing and it's a great environment to be within. But you pitch to brands globally, 10, 11 brands a week, sometimes in a busy week, and not all of them come through. And that's the case, the same similar case with the Glastonbury tickets. I mean, we pulled together. I think we've done it 3 times. We've attempted to get tickets together, and we've not been successful, even though that document is I would agree, it is a pinnacle of my organisation. But no, I didn't bring it up at interview. But if she saw it now, she would definitely say, yeah, that is a mirror of how we sometimes have to operate when we're pitching to brands.
I think you get promoted if you showed it to them right now. And
I might
for those
try
people
it.
who aren't aware of what I'm for those people who aren't aware of what I'm talking about, Glastonbury Music Festival over in the UK, one of the hardest events to attend in the world. And we've tried together 3 times to get involved. And I remember the first time that you said, hey, come and join our group. You add me to this WhatsApp group. You then sent me a PDF document that's about 15 pages long. It's got a very detailed list of tasks that you have to do, saying these are your groups. And then there's a whole set of if and then situations. Should you get through or should you not, to make sure that everybody in the bunch gets through and gets a tick. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is the most organized and detailed thing I've ever seen. And every year builds on the following year. I think the feedback I had for you one year was that the time zone GMT to British summertime was a bit out one year, which kind of threw me once, but that's okay. And
And you caught it
and
for the whole group, which was great.
it was what's that?
You caught it for the whole group, which was great. You saved us.
No worries at all. Happy to help. But it was outstanding. And I just thought about that. I was like, gosh, whoever is in Kiri's team at work is very lucky to have her.
Well, that's good. I'm going to have to, because she will listen to this, mainly because I'll send it in the family chat once it's live. But I'm going to have to shout out my older sister, because it is her nickname. Her name's Anya. Her nickname is Plania, because the planning gene is completely cemented in her, and I have learned from her. So the skeleton of that document most definitely came from her direction. But I'm glad that it was appreciated. And look, Glastonbury, I think it's 150,000 people a year get tickets, and over 2-3 million globally try and queue and apply. So your odds are not great. And my opinion on that is, if we can be organised and get as many people pulling in the right direction, then we've got a better chance. And my worst nightmare would be if somebody got through to the registration page, which you will see on, I think, maybe page 11 of the document, with the screenshots, and put in the wrong details, and we all lost out on tickets. So I would only kick myself.
You are ready for everything, which I absolutely love. Let's dive into your career, into how you got to where you are now, because it's awesome what you're up to at the moment. And side note for those watching on YouTube, some people watching might recognize your background right now, because I have recorded a couple of podcasts in that very position where you are sitting now, because you are my go-to when I'm in London, that spare room in your apartment. And so, yeah, those wooden beams would be familiar with a few very keen listeners. But we like to start episodes with a few quick fire questions, just to let people know a bit more about yourself. So first one I've got for you, what was your first ever job in sport?
I was a student union sports officer, elected in by, I think it was about 11,000 votes I got, 34,000 students voting at the University of Nottingham. And yeah, student union sports officer was my title. And I was on, at the time, the minimum wage in the UK. So working for passion, not money.
11,000 votes. That is incredible. And what did you study when you were at university?
Psychology, and very much enjoyed it.
Nice. Just side note, how do you see that playing into your role at the moment, or roles over the past few years?
I mean, I use it daily, because psychology is all around. It's not reading minds, as everybody always asks me. It's around people and behaviours, and how decisions are made, why they're made, why certain things happen, and there's always a pattern to behaviour. So there's always a consequence to an action, and that is exactly the case in the workplace, and how people come together, how they operate. Especially when I'm managing people in previous roles that I've had, it's been super important for me to be able to have an understanding and a high level of empathy to get the best out of my team. And it's all psychology. It all comes down to people and how they operate together and how they make decisions together. So for me, it's something that I think we probably all use daily. I just have an additional level of understanding from my degree as to why people might be thinking the way that they're thinking or behaving the way they're behaving.
And when you're working in partnerships, when you're working with a lot of different stakeholders, perhaps a psychology degree is an underrated pathway and background to this area of sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sit down and, as I alluded to earlier, I could have 10 different meetings in a couple of days, and every single person that I'm speaking to is going to be different, and they're going to react differently. And body language is a big part of that, and being able to read a room and read how somebody's responding to your presentation, if they're getting bored, if they're engaged. That really plays into how I take the conversation, how I continue the meeting. So, yeah, it all comes down to the psychology of it. I'm not an expert, but I definitely believe my degree plays a big role in what I do day to day.
We might come back to this because I've definitely sat in your apartment and loosely heard some of the conversations you've had to have with people in the spare room. So I'm interested in your take on how you have those difficult
Yeah,
conversations.
absolutely.
But for now, your favorite sporting moment of all time?
It's got to be the Lionesses winning the Euros. There is no doubt. And I hadn't seen that question before, and you hadn't prepped me for it. There's zero hesitation. Hands down, I was in the stadium, lucky enough to be there, and had fantastic seats. Was around amazing people, and those girls, they worked their socks off on that pitch for the whole duration of that tournament, and to have over 87,000 people at Wembley in London, which is my hometown, watching England win a European Championship, incredible. So I can't actually put it into words. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My screensaver on my laptop every day when I go to work is a snapshot of the attendance at Wembley with the crowds surrounding it, and it just gives me inspiration every day to work in sport.
Incredible. And for those outside of London, they might not know, but they named a train line after the Lionesses. Is that right?
They did, yeah. The train line that runs through Wembley Park, the overground line, is now the Lioness line, which is incredible. Do you know what? I think the way that England captured the success of the Lionesses after that win in 2022 is actually very admirable. We did a lot, and yes, we could always do more, but the country really it turned a corner. We shifted the dial, and the investment, the awareness, the general feeling around females succeeding on the sporting field leapfrogged a lot of other moments in culture and entertainment in the UK and in Europe as well. And yes, loads more that we can do, but a fantastic milestone. So I was so glad that I was there and present and able to watch it live.
Amazing. Love to hear that. I know a lot of Australians could empathise with that feeling with the Matildas at the Australian World Cup as well, which unfortunately the final didn't go your way. I know you made the trip out here to
Yeah.
win us out. That could have been your favourite sporting moment, but
You know what?
that's
It's
an excellent one
that
nonetheless.
that tournament's number 2. I had the best 6 weeks in Australia. I again lucky enough to be there for the duration of the tournament. Very grateful to my partner for being able to get me access into to watch and support the Lionesses. And yeah, Australia, the way that we were welcomed as a community, a women's football community into Australia was incredible. And the way that the games are run, the organisation, the passion from the volunteers and the community was incredible. And you could feel it across the country, even though the country is so large. Everywhere you went, every city you went, you knew that the World Cup was happening. And yeah, the result didn't go our way, but the best game was the Australia-England game. And I'm sorry to say it, Ruben, I know it wasn't a good result for Australia, but the atmosphere, my goodness, you wouldn't have thought 5 years ago that the atmosphere would be like that at a women's football game. And
Well, you'll be happy to hear the Matildas have sold out, I think, the next dozen or so
amazing.
games in
Yeah.
Australia. Like you can't get a ticket anymore. It's
It's
incredible.
absolutely amazing. And the players, you've got to give the players credit, because yes, a lot goes on behind the scenes, and I'm part of that, and I have a job behind the scenes, but if the players don't perform on the pitch and they don't have that sort of personality that draws people in, you don't get those sorts of games. And so the players deserve a lot of credit, and I think it's really important we always give them that. And for us to have the privilege to watch them is something, but then to have the privilege to sort of hear their stories is something that I think women's football is really special at doing.
Absolutely. Awesome. Your favorite interview question to ask of candidates when you are trying to hire them?
I always like to ask how their friends would describe them. So, once we've done all the formal questions, I always like to have a chat with people in interview, because I think it's important. My parents have always taught me that you can judge someone based on their friendship group and their friends. And I do think it's pretty accurate. It's a pretty good thing to live by. And I've got some amazing friends, you being one of them. And I'm so lucky to have great friends. And I think in an interview, if someone can talk about, positive traits that their friends might describe them as, that shows me what their personality's like and what they might be in the office and, like in the office and like as a teammate, beyond a formal conversation and an email chain. So, yeah, listening to people, how their friends would describe them, their peers would describe them, is a go-to for me.
Well, we started that episode by describing how you might be perceived, because that is probably the first thing that comes to mind when someone asks me, "What's Kiri like? What would you like to be like to work with?" Well, have you tried going to Glastonbury with her?
I might use that Glastonbury anecdote, actually. If anyone ever asks me, I say, well, I can organise tickets, but I'm also really good fun at Glastonbury as well, I'd like to think.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I can do both sides well.
Exactly.
Is there a particular book or podcast that's helped you at work that you'd recommend to people?
Do you know what? I was thinking about this one on my commute home, because on my commute, I do listen to quite a few things, but I also am guilty of watching a Friends episode on Netflix and on my commute home, because I just want to switch off. So if I was to pick a podcast or a book, I'd say the one that I listen to the most and get the most from in my career is The Sports Agents. So it's hosted by Gabby Logan, who is one of my favourite TV personalities in sport. She's a very impressive woman. She's held such prestigious roles. And for me, it's a way to keep up to date with current affairs, but to get a balanced view on the sporting news and what's going on in the world of sport. And they do cover both sides of the opinion and the debate quite well. So for me, that's one I use on a day-to-day basis. And I do learn from it as well, because it's hard to keep on top of everything that's happening. And it's important that I am across things, because when I meet with brands and partners, I need to be able to know, whether something's happened in the sporting world and what the opinions are around it. So I would go to that on The Sports Agents, but I would take this opportunity to say that it's okay to also not have to watch or listen to something informative all the time. And, being able to switch off is a skill. And I don't feel guilty anymore about the fact that I might watch an episode of Friends, or sometimes even something a little bit deeper like Yellowstone, on my way home from work, and feel absolutely fine about doing that.
Love it. And finally, if you had 30 minutes to pick anyone's brain, who would it be and why?
Oh, that's a hard one. Do you know what? I would have said Serena Wiegman. I would have said Serena a couple of months ago, but I've read her book, so I feel like I've got a lot from the book. It's a bit of a
For those who don't know, who's Serena?
Serena is the Lionesses manager. So the one that helped them win the Euros and took them to a World Cup final, and is, in my opinion, an extreme legend of women's football, extreme legend of the game. But I'm going to answer differently, and I'm going to go to someone I've already mentioned, which is Gabby Logan. I laugh out loud sometimes at the podcast because of the stories she's got, and I would just love to have 30 minutes to ask about things that she can't talk about on the podcast that's happened in her career, because I think it would be an extremely good conversation. And I think she's seen a lot, and she's traveled the world, and her education on sport is incredible. So I would love 30 minutes with her.
We might have to find a way to get in touch with her. Sounds like she'd be a great guest as well.
Yeah, if you can get her on the podcast, that would be a win.
Yep. Amazing. Awesome. Well, let's dive into a bit more of what you're up to at the moment. So at the moment you are the senior commercial partnerships manager at DAZN, and for everyone over in Australia, where the majority of listeners are, they're about to find out who DAZN are because they have just bought out the Foxtel Group for I think 3.4 billion Australian dollars. So they're about to take over everything. Um, but tell us a bit more about like your role at DAZN over in UK/Europe and what you're up to at the minute.
Yeah, so I started at DAZN coming up to a year ago in a couple of weeks, and I work on the commercial partnerships in across our women's sports portfolio. So I was brought in to work on partnerships across our tentpole rights, so Women's Champions League, and then our domestic football portfolio. We've got rights in France, Italy, Spain, Germany, across Europe for women's football, with some in the US as well. And I sit in a very lean but effective team. So we're quite a small team. We've got a couple of members in the US, a member in Germany, and then three of us based in the UK as a women's sport group. And we've got other DAZN staff supporting us absolutely and working towards the same objectives. But as a team, we're quite lean. And for me, that was an amazing opportunity to be able to learn. And that was the biggest driver for me coming into DAZN and into that environment. And to be able to sit next to my manager and have direct conversations on a day-to-day basis without needing to book in a meeting or time, squeeze time in to do that, you just learn so much. And she is very experienced in the broadcast and sports space and has got lots of financial and business experience. And so I am learning every single day just by sitting in the same office as her and the rest of the team as well. So yeah, I'm partnerships and commercially focused, but because we're such a small team, we often support each other on various things. And I can find myself in conversations around, rights and how we could commercialize new rights, but also, production and how we can build in additional inventory so that we can sell that as broadcast sponsorship. So I've learned a lot and I've had to learn quite quickly. And that's been the best thing about working at DAZN.
Amazing. Well, I saw your recent LinkedIn post the other day that the DAZN women's football team has been shortlisted for Football Business of the Year at the Women's Football Awards, which is amazing. And often when you read posts like this, you think, okay, DAZN, they've got an award, massive company. But then when you actually dig underneath the surface, it's like, what, you and a couple of other people are contributing to this. So the work you're doing is like really getting noticed and having a direct impact to an award like this, which is absolutely outstanding. Can I get your thoughts? Like, if you were to really drill it down, like what has been the most impressive thing that you as a small team have been able to achieve that leads to a nomination like this?
I think it's the sheer volume of what we managed to do as a team and how high functioning we are, even though we're global and we're working across different time zones and juggling lots of other things. And one of my colleagues, she's not only sorting out rights for women's football, but she's working across other emerging sports. So most recently, Run GP, which is a new growth sport, that Mo Farah's launched, which I'm quite excited to be a part of that as well. So I think it's the sheer breadth and depth of what we're doing. So scale. And for me, a big milestone, and it was felt across the organisation and the women's football community, was reaching over 1 million subscribers on YouTube. We are the largest dedicated women's football channel for YouTube globally. And that was a huge milestone for us. And getting the YouTube plaque, with 1 million subscribers engraved on it. And kudos to the team that were there 3 years ago when that channel was launched. I wasn't part of that. So they have done extremely good work, but that was a big celebration for us and something that I really enjoyed being a part of, because it just shows people do want to watch women's sport and they want to watch women's football, and they're dedicated fans that care. So they're not just people that are stumbling across, an app and flicking onto a video and watching it. They're people that are choosing to subscribe to a women's football dedicated channel.
Mm. When you are going out and trying to find brands you can liaise with and partner with, what is the pitch to those brands to say, hey, get involved and sponsor and advertise through women's football?
Yeah, I mean, DAZN, the overall pitch for DAZN is that it's just so impressive as a global platform. We streamed last year 90,000 events across 200 territories and had over 3 million regular viewers. But for women's football specifically, the fact that we've got such a broad portfolio of rights, and the fact that we've had the Women's Champions League for the last 4 years globally, and that for the last year that's been free and accessible to everybody. We've removed barriers so people can watch it without having to subscribe, without having to pay. That's a big selling point, because women's football is at a point where that is needed. You need to be able to drop barriers and get people watching, and it is growing and it's on a growth trajectory and it's done fantastically well as a sport. But we've got to make sure that we keep cultivating that, and that we give fans easy access to as many live and non-live sporting materials as possible. So when we go to brands, we're talking not only about what we've achieved with viewership, but we're talking about the fact that DAZN has such an array of rights across the world, domestic and international leagues. We've got volleyball, we've got Love B, which is the US volleyball competition. We've got running now with Run GP. We've got you can go onto the DAZN app and you can look at all the different sports we've got. But in women's sport in particular, it's how can we as a broadcaster bring emerging and successful leagues and sports to fans in the easiest and most accessible way. And that's how we approach pitches. But also, it's got to be business savvy. So DAZN is not treating women's sport as a CSR project. It's not a charity. Women's sport is its own entity. It's got its own business. It generates revenue. It brings fans together. It makes people excited. So we've got to treat it like that. And that's how we pitch. We pitch as a business, and we pitch that women's sport is something that can help brands tell their stories, help brands explain about why their product or whatever they're advertising can benefit the female football audience. So that's how we approach it. It's a very similar approach to how we'd approach a men's sport as well. And that's the other good thing about DAZN. We don't treat them differently.
Amazing. And when you are like thinking about what brands might align best to it, how do you go about that prospecting process to think about, all right, who are the brands that best align to this specific product?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to, I've spoken about them already, but a lot of it comes down to the athletes and the stories they want to tell. So a lot of fans and viewers in women's sport are more invested in the stories, the athletes themselves, rather than this sort of ingrained team mentality that we maybe see in the men's game, because it's been around for less time, but also because the storytelling is so good. And the reason the Matildas are selling out all their games is because they did an absolutely amazing job of telling the stories of those players in that squad to the rest of the world and Australia itself. So stories are really important. And when we're speaking with brands and approaching brands, that's the absolute key: is can we create a connection between a story or a team that we're working with and the product? And if we can't, can we come up with a campaign that's mutually beneficial for both the athlete or the team and the product? And there have been some amazing examples of that, not necessarily on DAZN, but amazing examples of that in the women's football space. And I think the challenge is ensuring that ideas are original, but that they're going to resonate, and that we don't saturate the market with the same messaging over and over again. So I think being true to what's important to the athletes, what's important to the fans, is key for brands. And I also think that brands themselves are picking up on that in the women's game. So you're seeing less and less generic advertisement and more storytelling and narrative, which is really good to see.
Mm. How involved are you with those conversations? Because I'm guessing those are rooms full of the sponsor, yourself, the creative teams, whoever's going to be shooting and producing these sort of campaigns as well. What's your involvement like in those conversations? Are you the one saying like, hey guys, I've got a great idea. What if we shot this? Or do you leave that to the creative team and you kind of just make sure you bring people on the journey? What sort of involvement do you have at that sort of touch point?
I think, look, it varies depending on who the brand is that we're speaking to and where the conversation has come from in the ecosystem of DAZN. But I'll go back to the point I made earlier. We are a lean team, and part of my role is cultivating a relationship. And if that means that I need to come up with an idea, then I will do that. Equally, I do have an ingrained passion for women's football and women's sport. So it's quite easy for me to come up with links and ideas because my knowledge of the game is there because I watch it as a fan. And I also have the privilege to work in it. So to be able to come up with concepts might be easier for me compared to somebody that isn't a fan of women's football that sits in the creative team. And we do have amazing creative and production teams at DAZN, but I've definitely come up with ideas in meetings myself. I've equally got them from our creative and production teams and worked with them. So it does depend on the client and the relationship that we've got. But again, with the psychology of it, the biggest thing for me is when we're speaking to a brand or a client is understanding what their objectives are, what they want to achieve, and then how can we go and make that happen. And if I come up with an idea, then brilliant. But if it's someone else that comes up with it, I'm also equally as happy to work and bring that to life.
I think way back in episode 50 of the podcast, this will come out in the 300s for context. Finn Bradshaw was he's the head of digital at the ICC, and he was the head of digital when I was at Cricket Australia too. And I asked him like, what's the number one thing that people need to be successful in a role in digital? And he said empathy for the audience, because if you can nail that, then you can give fans what they want. And it sounds like that's exactly what you have. One of the biggest strengths that you bring to this role. I'm interested to understand when you're going through that selling process and packaging up a deal for a brand, how cut and copy are some of your deals, or how creative do you have to get with all the different assets that sort of sit across the DAZN ecosystem to be like, well, actually, you know what, we can pull in this over here or that over there, as opposed to just kind of being like, nah, here's, A, B, and C options, take your pick.
Yeah, great question. So DAZN is, as an OTT platform, is much more flexible than a linear channel. And for people, listeners that might not know the difference, because it is it's terminology I've had to learn, we've got the capability to have multiple streams going on at once. We have the flexibility to have non-live content on the platform, live content simultaneously. It's not a channel that runs 9 to 9 and has a program every hour with ad breaks. So we've got the flexibility to build in different packages around broadcast. And yes, there are set structures around ads and broadcast sponsorship and things we can and can't do. And there is also legislation around what you can and can't advertise depending on the league or the country that you're broadcasting in. But we can be creative, and we try to work with brands to come up with ideas that make them stand out, that do something different. And we've had case studies in the past of brands coming to us saying, well, we want to talk about positive language in women's football, and we've come up with a mechanism and a product that's digitally enabled fans to talk to each other positively in a safe space whilst watching the game. So there are solutions we can overlay and put in broadcast that can bring the broadcast to life whilst also meeting brand objectives. And that's the beauty of working at DAZN and working at an OTT platform where you've got more flexibility than a traditional broadcasting channel.
Are there any examples that come to mind in, say, the last year that you've been there, or even, in the year before that, that you might be aware of, that a brand was looking for a particular solution and someone's thought, actually, we've never done this before. We could, try this for the first time, and now it's become a regular part of what you go out with to sell?
I think that the pep talk example that I just gave around positive language in the game, and sending messages of support to teams and players. That women's football had at the beginning, and still unfortunately has, this problem of negative comments, and sometimes it verges on hate and hate speech on platforms, and that can be social media platforms, but also on the YouTube platforms or whatever. And we had a brand that came to us and said, we would really like to support stamping that out, and we want to send messages of positivity and support and enable fans to speak freely and have their opinions, but in a safe environment where hate will be drowned out, and women's football will be supported and watched and spoken about because of the athleticism and the success on the pitch, rather than the fact that it's females playing the sport. So we launched a digital fan zone on the broadcast for the Women's Champions League last year, and we ran it across 13 knockout games, and it did amazingly well. It was nominated for multiple awards, won an award, and that product is being sold across a load of DAZN broadcast opportunities, because it's a second device way to bring fans globally together, get them to talk about what they're seeing on the screen. It's not just used in football, it's used in F1, it's used across our sports portfolio, and it's evolved, and the product team have done an absolutely amazing job to build in additional features, and you can share gifts for your team, and you can get coins and buy gifts and send them to other people in different countries, and it has really, really developed. I can't say that was all down to that one brand that came to us and asked, because I think the product, I wasn't there for that, but I think the product was already in development. But the way that we've evolved it has definitely changed based on the conversations we've had with brands.
That's awesome to hear. I know back when I was at Cricket Australia, so my job was digital commercial specialist, and every month or so, like my manager would find a new part of the app that hadn't been commercialized yet, and would talk to the team and be like, "Hey, can we put a logo here?" Which at the time, like, put me in a very steep learning curve to actually talk to the product team and understand, like, how the hell is our app developed? How is our website put together? And then they would help me understand what we can and can't do. Have there been parts of DAZN that you were unaware of as a function before, that have led you to, going on a steep learning curve? Perhaps it's that product space or somewhere else.
Yeah, honestly, I had no idea about broadcast before I started at DAZN, and it is a whole nother world. The teams that sit in production, the teams that sit in planning, there is a whole team that plans what goes out when, makes sure that adverts go out in the correct countries, that don't breach advertisement laws. There's a 200-page compliance, booklet around advertisement that goes across the globe. And because we are global, and we are truly global, you can imagine the size of those teams and the amount of coordination. You think my Glastonbury document was good, you've not even seen you've not even seen a dent in the documentation that they use. And so I've learned a lot. I've not learned it all, and there's still so much to learn, but I've learned a lot about the process of when I go in and pitch to a brand, and if that conversation is successful, there are then hundreds of things that need to be done to make sure that sponsorship is brought to life. And I rely, and the sales team in general rely on so many different components coming together, and it all just comes down to effective communication and time. You need time to get this stuff done. We are global, so we have the luxury of the fact that we've got teams working all over the world, so we cover most hours of the day. But yeah, it requires a lot, and the sheer volume of work that those teams do is impressive. So a lot more to learn. I'd also love to sit in a van at a live game one day, and just watch how the production and the cameras all come in together, because you see all the vans parked outside a stadium. There's people in there working so hard to make sure that people sitting at home on their sofas can watch and get a good stream, and it's all tied together nicely. So that's one aspect that I'll probably try and do that actually before the end of the season this year. I'd love to get wrapped up and get in a van and watch how they work in all sorts of weather and conditions.
Mm. I know over in Australia, Fox Cricket during the summer put out some really cool pieces of content on Instagram showcasing what the director of the broadcast feed does behind the scenes, and you just like basically hear him. Um, he's kind of like a conductor, being like, "All right, trumpets at the back, now violins at the front," but really saying like, "All right, camera one, camera two, like zoom in, zoom out, like go to the crowd." And like you see him controlling this orchestra of tech to kind of bring the broadcast to life, which is really cool to observe. We love podcast crossovers at SportsGrad,
Mhm.
and I was fortunate to cross over with yourself and Andrew Ryan, the director of FIBA Media in Paris, and discover that you guys are closely working together. Can you share a bit about what you're doing with basketball? And for those who aren't aware, Andrew Ryan, good friend of the show, first came on in episode 148 or so, and he came on through a connection via other good friend of the show, Garth Town. So the sports industry is all very connected, and then now to see like one of my very first sports industry friends now working directly with Andrew was very cool realization for myself. But what are you guys doing there together?
He was actually in the office today, so this is a big coincidence. I'm glad you brought it up. So DAZN have a very good and well integrated relationship. We've got a FIBA, so I don't actually know the exact words for it, but the International Basketball Federation, so it's FIBA, it's like FIFA, but for basketball. DAZN have, I think it's a 17-year partnership deal with FIBA to stream basketball in certain countries all over the world. From a women's point of view, which is my link in, we have this year been the broadcaster for the EuroLeague women's basketball competition. So that's European League of Basketball that sometimes you see WNBA players come over because the way that the scheduling works in basketball means it dovetails so they can get their season in the US and then come and play European basketball. So you do see some big names competing. And I was lucky enough to be invited out to Paris as part of that relationship with EuroLeague Basketball and FIBA to go and watch the 3v3, which was the first time that was at the Olympics. Absolutely epic event. But also managed to catch the quarterfinals of the women's 6v6. 6v6? What am I on about? Yeah, 6v6.
5 on 5.
5 on 5, sorry. I knew it wasn't 6v6. 5 on 5 basketball at the Paris Olympics. So, and actually saw France compete, and the atmosphere was incredible. So, we've got a really good relationship with them. We are broadcasting the games. My role is to draw up packages with the team to see if we can get broadcast sponsorship to enhance the broadcast, but also to bring revenue to the game and revenue to the sport and grow the audience globally. And obviously, as you get broadcast sponsorship, you can do more on the broadcast, so you can then reach more fans, you can give fans a better experience. So that's what we're trying to do with EuroLeague basketball. And Andrew is part of the team that sit at FIBA, and he's got lots of connections at DAZN across various different teams. But and I think he was in back-to-back meetings by the looks of it today. I saw him in and out of the meeting rooms. But yeah, he's a fantastic guy, and the whole team at FIBA are brilliant. And I've been out to visit them in Geneva, and that was great as well. And I don't know, have you been to the House of Basketball in Geneva?
No, I'm yet to go there. I would love to check it out
Add,
at one
add that
point.
to your list. If you can get a meeting at the House of Basketball, it's a very cool place. The office is sort of built in the shape of a hand, and in the thumb there's a museum, and it's a basketball museum. And I spent about 3 hours looking at all the different memorabilia, and my highlight was seeing the Space Jam, the film Space Jam. They had all the like outfits and some of the figures from Warner Brothers in glass cabinets. I loved it. So I can't believe actually how many basketball films there are. And there was loads of memorabilia in there. So it's a really cool office, and they're a great team. And yeah, it's a growing sport, and we need to get behind it exactly how we've got behind football, and we need to build a business out around it, and we need to bring it the sort of the audience and the fan base that it deserves.
Amazing. I know certainly out in Australia, basketball is definitely one of the most progressive sports in terms of its willingness to innovate, and that is kind of driven by the fact that over here it is privately owned. And great news for the WNBL in Australia, that has just been bought and brought under the same umbrella as the NBL so that they can do a lot more with that too. But you go to one of their games, and it's the most entertaining 3 hours of your life. But it's got to compete up against the traditional sports of football and NRL, which a massive beast, but have its limitations in terms of how things it can be done. So cool to hear that basketball is progressive right around at the same time. I'm keen to dive into more of your career journey and how you got to this point, because we crossed over back in our university sport days, and here we are, 7-8 years later, which is wild to think about. But tell me about how your career progressed at a like top line level. Like, what was sort of this sequence of roles that you went through coming out of university to land in DAZN?
Yeah, so once I had finished my sports officer year at the Students' Union, I got an internship at BUCS, which stands for British University Colleges and Sport, and that's the national governing body for university sport in the UK. So I did an internship there, and then I got a phone call from the director of sport at the University of Nottingham, who is a fantastic mentor of mine, and big shout out to him for the role he's played in my career. And he said, look, there's an opportunity for you to come back to the University of Nottingham and get involved in this. We've got a fixed term role as a club development coordinator. So I went back to the University of Nottingham, and I stayed there for nearly 5 years and worked as a club development officer. So working with the student sports clubs, the student athletes, the coaches. I managed at one point, I think I was managing 24 paid coaches. So that was the largest team I've managed, and it was tough. I was young. It was my first management role. But I loved it, and I worked with two of my best friends and had the best time. And Nottingham went from being 6th, 7th, even sometimes out the top 10 in the university table, right up to finishing second by the time that I completed my career there. And then from there, went into the charity sector, wanted to move down to London, and went to Greenhouse Sports, which is a charity based in London. Quite a small charity working just in London schools, doing a lot of good work. I went in as a program development manager, so looking at, again, managing coaches, but managing the relationships between the schools where the coaches were contracted, the charity, and the coach themselves. And then, went to DAZN. So took a leap and went into the corporate sporting space, and just really wanted to get into women's football. The Euros was a big part of my drive to do that, but also wanting to be able to make a difference in a sport that I could see was growing and I'd enjoyed all my life, played, watched, had been a big fan of. And just an absolute privilege to be able to get a role and get involved in something that I believe in so much.
Now that you've seen a lot of DAZN, if you could try anybody else's job for just one day, whose would it be and why?
At DAZN or in general?
Yeah, at DAZN.
At DAZN. Well, I've already said I'd like to go into a production van at a game, so that's definitely up there. But I think I'd also quite like to be a cameraman, like actually have a chance to sit and choose what I'm going to film. I'm not very good with like taking photos and being on my phone all the time, like, and getting good videos and good angles. And I often get in trouble by my partner for, like cropping something out that I was supposed to get in a photo. But I think it would be pretty cool to sit on one of those. I don't know what the technical word is, so I'm going to get myself into trouble with the production team here. But the cameras that move along the sideline of a game, they're like on an electrical wire. You're basically going side to side. That would be pretty cool. Or operating a spider cam.
Yep.
On a football pitch. So I'd say sort of like camera production would be a role I'd love to try. It's not very serious.
Yeah, because you can't. No, that would be fun. You can't be on just like an electric car going up and down the side, or you're operating a video game on the other with a joystick up above with a spider cam. That would be great.
Yeah, or operating a drone or something that, applying a little bit of pressure that if I crashed the drone or whatever, it might ruin a feed, just so that it adds adrenaline. But that would be quite fun.
That would be great fun. When I share my journey into sport, the FISU Forum in 2016 is a key part of that, because that opportunity to go to France was I tell a lot of people by luck. I'm just not sure that they advertised the role, and I was the only person who put their hand up. So I ended up in France meeting you.
Mm.
But one thing I do share is that when I did get to France, I met a group of people who were at the top of their game, doing more than any other student that I had come across in the world. And you were a part of that group of people. And so you became, and you and the other people at that conference kind of became my inspiration to go back home and do a lot more with my career based on, what you guys were sharing. Um, what do you remember from that conference, and like how did it kind of influence where you went after that?
The biggest take home for me was, look, I came out of two amazing friendships. So yourself and Naomi, I'll give her a shout out, who's based in New Zealand. We've stayed in touch, and that was the biggest win for me. Yes, I learned from the sessions, but I think I'll go back a couple of steps to answer your question. At school, I had an amazing PE teacher who's now the head teacher at the school that I was at. And we were always taught to ask good questions, to network, but it wasn't called networking when we were at school, but to speak to people, to shake people's hands, to smile, to speak up, to introduce yourself, and to be confident. And that was taught in the PE lessons, but it was also taught to me as a general student. And I think he saw something in me around, my ability to make friends, but also speak to adults and communicate. And the FISU Forum was a challenge in a way because there were so many people, young people from all over the world, and there were language barriers and there were cultural barriers. But actually, I had this confidence that I could speak to whoever, and that I could, asking questions is a big skill, and being able to do that means you can converse with anyone. But that I could, represent and hold sort of, I think we were there representing Great Britain from a student point of view, but hold myself in good stature to be able to have and build relationships and build networks. So that's what I took away from it. But it was mainly being able to put into practice what had been drilled into me that I was good at and that I could do. And yes, I took away friendships, but I was able to really, practice networking skills and do it in a safe environment where there are additional challenges that you don't normally see in a London networking event.
Mm. Well, we had a lovely catch up in Paris last year where I think for the first time in 8 years, yourself, Naomi, and I
Yeah,
were all in the one place at the one time. We caught up at, I forget the name of the venue, but a rooftop up in Montmartre overlooking Paris, which was
it's
stunning,
delightful. Yeah.
which is incredible little milestone for us. But um, I know for me personally, that conference kind of gave me a network around the world for the first time in my life. And so the following year, or maybe it was 2018, I think I booked a around the world trip to basically go and catch up with everybody who I'd met at the conference. And that was the first time that I realized how fun it was having a network in sport. So I flew to the US and caught up with Jordan in Detroit, and then came around to the UK and saw you and Matt up in Warwick, and then went up to, where was it? Norway, and caught up with Jens and Tormund, and then over to Stockholm and saw Chris, and just like it carried on. I was
Yeah.
going to say stay with Timor in Russia for the World Cup, but that fell through. But then even for yourself, like watching you come all the way to Australia, where you amazingly attended the St Mary's Salesian Footy Ball, which is my amateur football club. You like just happened to be in town during the middle of May, I think, when that was going on,
Yeah.
and to be able to take you to like a grassroots function event was really cool. I know we also took you to your first AFL game on a, you know, pretty miserable Friday night where the Hawks got pantsed by the Sydney
Yeah.
Swans on a
Yeah. I wasn't going to
rainy
bring it up, but
evening.
you did. So,
Don't worry, we beat Sydney the other night, so yeah, all is good now. But then even to see you over in New Zealand as well with Naomi quite regularly is quite cool too. So it's awesome to see kind of where that conference has led for everyone.
yeah. And I think it's something that if I could advise someone wanting to work in sport on one thing, it wouldn't be, I mean, yes, networking is important, but it would be throwing yourself into environments like that maybe push you out of your comfort zone, because that's what FISU did. I don't know if you remember, but we were staying in like I think it was a student tower block, and it was so hot. There was no AC. I think at one evening I might have even like decided with a few of the other students that we were going to camp out under the stars because we just get a better night's sleep. But it was pushing boundaries with regards to cultural differences and you know, the way that people operated and worked in their respective countries was a big thing for me to be able to witness. And it opened my eyes up to the structures, the governance structures, but also the career structures globally across sport. I had no idea that some of the jobs and federations and um, you know, sporting organizations existed. And then I heard everyone introduce themselves and I was like, wow, okay, there's actually more to being a PE teacher, which is maybe what, you know, the career path that I'd always had in my mind because I loved PE so much. And don't get me wrong, PE teachers do an amazing job, especially my ones. So, but it just opened my mind. And the networking was a byproduct of that.
Yeah, similar to me. Like I had, I never knew how big university sport was until I arrived at that conference. I'd never heard of FISU before, the International Federation of University Sport, because in Australia, like everyone plays for their local club. You don't represent your university too much. It's not really a thing. And then I go over there and realize, like, gosh, okay, like European sport or European university sport is all over Eurosport and being broadcast as like a regular sort of product that you might tune into. Um, and there's people here from all around the world who really, really care about it. Like this is really cool. One of the other great things that came out of the conference for me was something like the first or second day. I'm not sure if you remember this, but we were playing bocce. Like it was like a get to know you activity.
Yeah.
We got into groups, and you didn't invite me to your group, unfortunately. So the Germans had to take me in, and they
Sorry about that.
I was left standing. I didn't have a group, and they said, "All right, you can be a part of our group, but you can't keep your name Ruben. We have to call you some. We have to give you a German name." And so they called me Martin. So for like the 3 or 4 day conference, they called me Martin every single day. And then the following year, I went back to the World University Games in Taipei, and I was walking through the dining hall, and all of a sudden there's Kirsten from the German delegation, and she sees me and she goes, Martin. And I was like, hello, how are you? Great to see you again.
Great stuff.
But then even off the back of that, like, yeah, even off the back of that, ran into Christoph, who was the head of delegation, and he said, hey, Ruben, we are running the World Championships for beach volleyball next year in Munich, landlocked state, which is an interesting place to have beach volleyball in and of itself. But he said, we're having the championships, you should come over and volunteer. And so sure enough, the following year, did my third physio event and volunteered for a week in Munich there. So like the network of university sport was incredible, I found out.
Yeah, and I think as well, university sport gives you a group of people that are like-minded, right? Like they're choosing to be involved in something, because at university you do have a choice. You choose whether you want to join a sports team or a music group or a language group, or it's up to you. And so you get that, you don't have that element of persuading people. It's not a chore, it's not something they have to do. And that brings a type of person that will follow up and will travel the world like you have done to connect and meet people. And then off the back of it, you get this bonus of friendship, which is always great.
Your roles in university sport largely around that development officer role, getting more people active and playing. Again, through your work with Greenhouse as well, very much like how can we get more people involved. But on the side of that, you picked up a role with the London Rowing Club as a business development manager. Did that for about a year or so. Can you tell me a bit about, firstly, why did you pick up that role on the side? What did it look like, and how did it help you jump into this commercial role you're in now?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a career move for me, in the sense of I'd done 4 years at Greenhouse. I'd been promoted internally at Greenhouse, and I'd hit a sort of point where I couldn't go higher without somebody leaving. So I was almost doing my role quite routinely. And I don't want to sit here and say it wasn't challenging, because working with children and in the charity sector is challenging in itself, and partnerships were a big part of that, and they are ever evolving. But I knew that I wanted to progress, and I wanted to keep progressing. And so I actually, a mutual friend that you also had at the grassroots AFL ball was Kate. She was working at London Rowing Club. She was a rower herself, and she was supporting them on various pieces around business development. And she said, look, I need to sort of park this, put it to one side. I need to focus on my career full time. Would you be interested? And I was looking for an opportunity that I could take on. And I was actually looking for voluntary or work experience to just help me transition into the corporate sector. It was a bonus that it was paid work. And it was a bonus that it was London Rowing Club, because I almost had a blank canvas. And so I took the role and I did it in my evenings and weekends. And lucky enough that Greenhouse obviously said, yeah, that's okay, you can go and get paid to do that. And I got to work on the London boat race, so the Oxford-Cambridge boat race, and worked on, how that event looked from a club point of view, how we could bring in guests to come and watch the race from this prestigious event space in London, and this, the oldest rowing club on the Thames, but also looked at how we could get people into that boat club not on boat race day, and how we could fill that space in the middle of the week and at weekends around the rowing. So it was a very much sort of like biz dev / sales / come up with creative ideas type of role. And it just enabled me to be able to talk about additional experiences I'd taken on and would help me in getting the role that I eventually got at DAZN. So it was a move in order to progress to a bigger one, and that's why it was only a year. But I actually just got off the phone with someone from London Rowing Club last week and volunteered my time at the boat race again this year. So, it's a great club, and but the meaning of that role was more around how can I step into the corporate biz dev space, and it was a really good way for me to be able to do that.
What sort of scope did they give you for that role? Was it like very defined, or given the nature of the club, was it very open-ended, like, hey, you're here, go and make what you will of it?
Yeah, the latter, really. There wasn't too much guidance, because essentially the boathouse was empty around 9 a.m. through to 5:30 p.m. Either side of that, people were rowing in and out of the boathouse. But they basically said, look, we want this club to become a business beyond the rowing on the river. We want people to be able to use this space. We want people to be able to enjoy the space, but also keep that passion of rowing tied in. And that was the only real scope I had, was to not detract too much away from the fact that it was a rowing club first and foremost, and that the paying members came first. So I had some amazing conversations at like companies such as PwC and Barclays and big corporate banks, where I was saying, actually, you could bring some of your pathway director people that are on a pathway to leadership, come and get them in a boat for a day, do some rowing, get them out working as a team, get them in the fresh air, out of the office, away from their desks, and then they can also sit and have a lunch and do a workshop around leadership in the club. So I was able to be creative and flexible, but I had to keep that rowing tradition in there, and I had no problem doing that because it was a rowing club first and foremost.
It sounds like that was opening doors to conversations that you might not have been able to be a part of without this vehicle to bring people in. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also I was managing my own time, and I didn't have a team, and I wasn't managing anyone. And it was a refreshing role to have alongside the one at Greenhouse, where I was 90% of my time towards the end of that role was firefighting and managing people. And it's an amazing, I love managing people, and I do think I've got a good skill set, and I'm quite strong at doing so, but it can be quite tiring and it can be quite draining, and you then lose sight of maybe some of the success that you want to gain from other things that you can do with your time. So the London Rowing Club role enabled me to practice a skill set I hadn't really used for the last couple of years, have conversations, as you say, with people that I wouldn't ordinarily meet with, but also try a few new things. So I did some, it was the first time I'd pitched in, I would say, 5 or 6 years. The last time I'd pitched was when I was in the university sports sector trying to get funding for, the men's football team to go on tour. So I think it enabled me to sort of get myself into that corporate sales mindset in quite a natural, organic and low pressured environment.
And how did this experience come up in your interview at DAZN, and what was their perception of that experience for you?
Pretty similar to how I've described there around practicing my skills. So it's really easy to say at interview level, I've got these skills, X, Y, and Z, and I can do this and I can do that. But the London Rowing Club role, I remember speaking about how I'd practically put those skills into practice, and how I'd successfully secured a partner to run workshops for corporate teams, and how I'd successfully brought in, people to buy tickets to watch the boat race, and what those conversations were like when there's hundreds of pounds being spent per ticket. You've got to have a sales pitch, and you've got to pull materials together, and so it was more of a practical application discussion. I didn't, London Rowing Club is a very small organisation compared to DAZN. So it was more around the practicalities of it rather than the scale and the amount of money and the number of clients. It was more around the skill set.
Mm. Yep. And were you able to walk into DAZN and say that you had, raised X amount of dollars, which was, an increase of, X percent from one year to the next? Or was it more about like, have you done this type of work before?
Yeah, I didn't do that from a London Rowing Club point of view, but I did do that from a greenhouse point of view. So I spoke about like
Mm.
how I'd worked with partners such as Sweaty Betty to, aim for 50% female participation across all of our school programs, and how we got funding in to do that and raised X amount. And I spoke about the fact that I led on a rebrand at Greenhouse for our kit. So the playing kit that
Mm.
we had 6,000 kids playing in it, but also all of our coaches. And I did that deal with New Balance. And so I was able to speak about revenue around that, but both roles weren't really around making money, to be completely honest. It was around driving awareness, and getting more people involved. So that was the biggest change in my role coming into coming into DAZN from Greenhouse, was that actually the sales aspect. And I hadn't had to really, really sell at the scale that we do at DAZN. So yeah, it was all around skill application, and that, I won't even sit here and say, because I'm sure my manager will probably listen to this, I wasn't even, that creative in my interview. I was very honest and factual. It was all around application of skill. I was honest about the fact that I hadn't
Mm.
done a multi-million dollar deal, and that I hadn't engaged in
Mm.
multi-million dollar deal conversations before, but that I had the skill set to be able to do that, and that I was confident in myself. Going right back to that amazing PE teacher that I had, giving me that confidence to know that you can stick me in a room with anyone and I could probably have a conversation, and I would be quite comfortable doing so. So yeah, it was all around application, and transferable skills.
I love that you've gone out and found this experience for yourself at, roughly 30 years of age, late, as you're trying to pivot in your, because one of the things that I encourage people to do to help them get to the job that they want is to go out and create what I like to call a DIY internship, or if you can get paid for it, even better. But basically, we go out and approach a club, charity, organization, basically an organization that's got low barriers to entry. So someone that needs help, and typically might not have a traditional interview process. And you go to them and saying, "Hey, this is how I can help improve your club or organization." So in Australia, they might be looking like, approaching the St. Mary's Salesian Football Club and saying, "Hey, I can run sponsorship for you because, the vice president who's got, 3 kids and a full-time job doesn't have time to do this all the time." But it gives you an opportunity to go out and have, as you say, have conversations with businesses that you might not normally get to have. And start using a skill set that might not be a part of your regular day-to-day job. Now, that's typically something that I encourage people coming out of university to go and do. So the fact that you've been able to identify that this is something that's missing in your skill set, later on for you to get to where you really want to go, and to be able to go and do it as well is, I think, outstanding, because I think it's an awesome representation of your awareness of if I really want to get to where I want to go in my career, what do I need to do to do that? You've sat in this role for a year to get to where you want to go, which is not a short period of time. It's not like you're trying to make a quick fix. It's like, no, this is a long-term career move. And now you are, working in the business of women's football, which is ultimately where you want to get to. So kudos to you for making that happen over a,
Thank you.
considered couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Um,
8 hours of evenings and weekends wasn't always easy. I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't complain about it sometimes when I was tired coming home from work. But yeah, as you say,
mm,
I don't think I I think I'd add one more thing to that, in that I don't think, even if you don't know what your identified gaps are, getting experience in a different type of role is not a bad thing ever. So even if you
Mm.
don't know that you need to pitching experience or sales experience, that's okay. I was going into it sort of just thinking, well, I know I want to make a shift in my career. I'm not exactly sure what that shift is, but hey, let me go and get some different experience. So yeah, it wasn't easy to juggle all the time, but definitely worth it.
Mm. You mentioned you are an excellent manager, which I can definitely attest to, and you've got a lot of experience in managing people and having tough conversations, which your psychology degree, I'm guessing, would lend itself to. What is your approach to having a tough conversation with somebody? How do you go about it? What are the principles to it? Where do you begin? Because I've heard you loosely do it without hearing all the details, but I can know that you do it in a very firm but professional professional way. So where do you begin with this sort of stuff?
Look, if I'm I think the conversation you overheard was in my previous role, when I was probably dealing with performance management. And performance management is something that I have seen done badly and done really well. And I've not got it perfect every single time, by the way. So I love managing people, and it's a skill that I really enjoy using. Whether or not I'm perfect at it or not is definitely not the case. And I'm sure that I'll have people that will say, no, I was an awful manager. But the way that I approach difficult conversations is always that I prepare. So I will never enter a difficult conversation on the whim, or while emotions are high, or in the heat of the moment. Preparation is absolutely key. I need to know facts. I need to know how I would respond if the reaction turns negative, how I would react if I get a positive reaction, what next steps are, what questions I could be asked off the back of the information that I'm trying to get across. Um, but the key as well in managing difficult situations is listening. You have really got to be able to actively listen. And I have had multiple occasions where I've not been actively listened to in stressful situations at work, and less so later in my career, but definitely earlier in my career. And it's so frustrating, and it just builds negative emotion if someone doesn't feel listened to. So always giving time and making sure you put time aside in a conversation. You're not sandwiching it between two other meetings, you're not squeezing it in, but actually you're preparing to know that you've got to have that difficult conversation. You need to allow time to listen to the other person, and for it to go on a little bit longer than you had planned. So they would be the two sort of key things that I always
Mm.
try to do.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Is there any particular language that you turn to or use? Because like literally like understanding what specific words to use can make all the difference. For example, like there's a great book that I've read in the past called, I've got it here on my shelf. It's called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg, which basically showed me that one approach to this sort of stuff is um, listing what you observe as opposed to adding judgment to what you're trying to talk about. Is there any specifics in how you go about the conversations you're having?
Yeah. So a big one, again, this actually comes from my mum, so my parents, is always using I statements when you're talking to somebody, because if I'm the one having the conversation, I am taking responsibility for what I'm saying. I am not going to cop out and say, we think, we believe, we don't think you're performing
Mm,
in this way. It's me having the conversation. I'm the manager. So it's, I believe, I think. And that also ensures that the person doesn't feel ganged up on, that they don't feel like they're backed into a corner with everybody talking about something. And
mm,
yes, we might have consulted with senior leaders around it as a team, but you've got to take responsibility for the conversation you're having. And so I statements are something that I always look for in my language, but also body language. And I would actually try to avoid, COVID was hard to do this, but I would try to avoid having difficult conversations over the phone or online. The ideal would be to have them in person, but if that's not possible, being able to have camera on no distractions and being open in body language, the worst thing that I could do when trying to deal with conflict or performance management is cross my arms, sit back, look unengaged or disengaged, I should say, because people mimic your behavior. So if I sit with my arms crossed and become defensive, it's then, completely on me if the person that I'm speaking to becomes defensive. So body language and eye statements, and then asking about how the person's feeling is so important. So if you're delivering a piece of information, let's just go on to conflict management here. If you're saying, look, I'm trying to resolve something, I'm trying to find a solution, this is the proposed solution that I think is a good compromise where we can collaborate to reach, an appropriate way to move forwards. How does that make you feel? And then listening to the response. It's an open-ended question. That person can use the time then to answer however they wish. They don't have to go into emotion if they don't want to. They can say, yeah, I feel the solution is a good one. Or if they want to tell me that it's making them feel frustrated or they're unhappy about it, angry about it, that's their time. So how does this proposed solution, or how does that make you feel, is a good one. And the final thing language-wise is, I often ask, do you feel that what I've said is fair? Because that also gives an opportunity for people to, or the person I should say, to come back to me and say, I don't think it's fair because of X, Y, and Z, and then we can address X, Y, and Z together. I also think it eradicates the risk of that person closing their laptop or walking out of the room and saying, it's completely unfair, the opinions were inaccurate, she doesn't know what she's talking about. That's not the truth, because I've given that person the opportunity to tell me whether it's fair or not.
Yep, allows you to really get to the root of the issue. Everyone can have their say, get out on the table.
Precisely, yeah.
Yep, that's awesome. I think the worst one is trying to go about it over text or email. Like if you end up trying in a email exchange.
I would never ever attempt that. I think I've been caught out once in an email chain where I've probably sent one email too many, and looked back and thought, actually, that required a in-person or at least a phone call earlier. I think tone over email is such a tricky one, because even now I double read my emails, especially if if there's a contentious point in them at all, because the way you write something is not necessarily the way you'd speak it. And we have conversations about it all the time in the office, because we're speaking with people from different countries, and you get different tones and different levels of English, and you've almost got to learn and train your mind to see the good in everything that you read before automatically thinking that they're being, brash or rude or dismissive. So that's another tip, is if you can train yourself to always look for the positive before jumping to the negative, it helps with email and text communication for sure.
One thing I've started to do regularly is use a platform called Loom to record myself in a video format to deliver instructions or tasks down to staff, so that if my instructions can seem a bit blunt or direct over email, then at least like through video, they can kind of hear my voice, see my body language, and get the same instruction and understand, okay, Ruben's just talking like normally.
Yeah. And look, everyone has a lot going on behind the scenes, at home, in their jobs. And sometimes we have bad days, and sometimes we miscommunicate, and sometimes we say the wrong thing in the wrong tone. And I think if you just hold in your mind that we're all human, and hopefully we're not all going to be robots soon. And, we'll keep AI at bay to a degree, because we need human interaction to be able to succeed and collaborate together. Then, there's an element of compassion and empathy. It goes back to the psychology side of things. If I'm forgiving of somebody's potential mistake over an email, they will be forgiving of my potential mistake in 6 months' time. So, swings and roundabouts, what goes around comes around. And I think it's really important that when you're entering a job for the first time, or you're entering a meeting for the first time and meeting someone for the first time, you understand how they communicate and you adapt, because it's going to take a few practices to get your communication perfect with that person. So that's the best way to learn, is looking around you, looking at what you appreciate, what you see as good management, what you see as good communication, and taking the best from the best and putting that into practice.
Mm. It's always fascinating from my point of view, hearing how much method there is behind the madness when you dig into how people do their job. So I've really enjoyed picking your brain on this. Um, Last one before we wrap up, because I love the direction that your kind of career has taken and how intentionally you've kind of redirected it to get to where you are. So I'd love to know, like, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, talk to younger Kiri at the point where you're like, I feel like I've hit a ceiling, I've got these aspirations over in women's football, not really sure how to get there or what to do about it. Knowing what you know now, like, what advice would you go back and give to your younger self in time?
It's hard because I don't I purposely try not to live with regret, so I've not got like a one moment that I would change. But advice wise would be, I think the earlier you get a broad understanding of the work industry that you want to go into, the better. So I got that with FISU, but that was whilst I was at university already. So I'd chosen my course, I'd been through my 3 years, I'd done my year as sports officer, and then I had this sort of like broad awakening to the world of university sport and the structures that sit within that. Um, so getting exposure to the industry that you're interested in as early as possible would definitely be one, but also chucking yourself into situations that push you out of your comfort zone at points that might not be natural ones. So, yes, everyone's encouraged to go and get work experience when they're in year 10 and then again when they're applying for universities. But how about doing it, when you're 3 or 4 years into your career in your first job, and actually you just want to try something new? And you can do a couple of hours a week, or you could do half a day at a weekend. And I think we've got into this sort of, I would say it's not unhealthy, but a culture of maybe having work experience and seeing it as a negative thing because we're not getting paid, or it's like, well, we've not decided what we want to do and we've not got a fixed career. That's okay. I would still now take on additional, if I had time, which I don't at the moment, but I'd still now take on an opportunity to try something new if I could, because who knows what might happen. And actually, I'm not fixed on what my next move is going to be. And the reason because of that is because I've got an open mindset as to how much there is out there and what opportunities there are out there. So my next move, I don't know what that is. And I'm not looking for it yet. But if I'm not open-minded and I don't throw myself into things, I'm never going to know. So
Mm.
that would be my one piece of advice. And enjoy yourself. Like, have fun. And if you enjoy your job and if you enjoy what you're doing, you will not feel like it's work. And as soon as it becomes unenjoyable, that then comes out in your performance, and then that you need to move on.
Mm. Kiri, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I know this episode has been a long time coming. So thank you for sharing your journey through your career and to where you got to now, and going into some of the specifics about how you do what you do. I know that really tactical advice is going to be very useful for a lot of people out there as well. And thank you for being you. Like, the relationship that we've got is probably one of the joys of being a part of the sports industry. And hopefully one of the, provides inspiration for other people out there to just get out there around the world, because, having a network around the world where you can link up every now and again has been one of the great, bits of fun that we've been able to enjoy. And on that note, I think the last time I saw you was when I did a bit of a fly in, fly out job to Budapest to see Fred again with yourself and Maria, which was,
Yeah. Yeah.
can't tell you how much of a core memory that has become for myself. That was one of the great days. Um,
And
but
it was an amazing weekend.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I need to tell you, because the next time I'm coming back to the UK in July, and I've got an Oasis ticket for you. I think I told you block out a date in July, but
July
yeah, I've got
25th.
a ticket for you. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God, you're joking.
No, I'm not.
Oh, they're not. I don't know if everyone's gonna be able to see this, but I am beaming. Thank you so much. What a legend.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. I thought, who else would
Oh,
I rather share this with?
oh, that's so good. Thank you so much. They were an absolute nightmare to get. So you didn't have a document to get that and you achieved it. There you go.
No.
Win-win.
No,
Oh, thanks so much,
exactly.
Ruben.
That's all
I'm
right. My
buzzing.
pleasure.
That's
Well,
that's amazing.
no worries. We'll take that offline.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can I do a quick shout out for your listeners?
Yeah, of course.
So I don't think I touched on this fully, but DAZN are the global broadcaster for the FIFA Club World Cup this summer. It's going to be streamed globally and exclusively for free on DAZN. So tune in and watch that. But the shout out is more that if anyone wants to get in touch about the broadcasting space, I'm not an expert, but I've got a lot of colleagues that are. Or anyone wants to chat about anything that happens at DAZN and what we do, please reach out. It would be my absolute pleasure to talk to you about that. But do tune in and watch some of the action. It's free, it's live, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it as well.
Amazing. Definitely take Kiri up on that if you are listening to this. She's a great person to know, and always good having a broader network in broadcasting too. All right, what up there? But thanks again, Kiri, and I'll see you in the UK shortly.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Yeah, can't wait.
Hey, last thing before you go. Everyone knows the sports industry is super competitive, so you might want to keep this to yourself. But every Monday, I send out an email called Shortcuts by SportsGrad. It takes 5 minutes to read, and it gives you everything you need to get an edge over other job hunters on a silver platter. Here you'll find exclusive job opportunities, networking events, and premium resources to get ahead. Again, it takes less than 5 minutes to read, and it's designed to help you get ahead and stay ahead. So if you want to receive the next one in your inbox, head to sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter. But as I mentioned, competition for jobs in sport is red hot, so perhaps keep this to yourself.